Jake Morrison sat in the corner of the smoky cantina, staring at the datapad in his hands. The numbers looked too good to be true. 1 million credits for a simple extraction job. His fingers drummed against the metal table as he read through. The mission details again. The cantina buzzed with the usual mix of traders, smugglers, and mercenaries. Nexus Station was always busy, but tonight felt different. People spoke in hushed tones, and everyone seemed to be watching their backs. Jake had been running mercenary operations for 15 years, and he could smell trouble from a mile away. Shadow fell across his table. Jake looked up to see a tall, thin alien with pale blue skin and forearms. The creature's black eyes darted nervously around the room before settling on Jake's face. "Commander Morrison?" The alien's voice was high and shaky. "I am Kethver. We spoke over the comm channels." Jake nodded and gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down. Tell me about this job." Kethver slid into the chair, his 4 hands fidgeting with a small device. "My company had a research team on Caracol 7. They were studying rare minerals when the planet went dark 3 days ago. We need them extracted immediately." Caracol 7. Jake frowned. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. What happened down there? Corporate coup? The planetary government was overthrown by a rival faction. All communications have been cut. We believe our people are trapped in the research facility. Jake studied the alien's face. Kethver was sweating, despite the cool temperature in the cantina. His eyes kept darting to the exits, and his hands shook slightly. This was more than just corporate anxiety. 1 million credits seems high for a simple extraction, Jake said. "What aren't you telling me?" Kethver's skin grew even paler. "The planet has been classified as a Deathworld by the Galactic Survey Corps. The environment is ... challenging." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Deathworlds were rare and dangerous. Only a few species could survive on such planets without extensive life support. Most mercenary companies wouldn't even consider jobs on Deathworld locations. How challenging? Jake asked. "High gravity, toxic atmosphere, aggressive wildlife. The usual complications." Kethver paused, then added quietly, "There may also be human military units involved in the conflict." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Around the cantina, conversation stopped. Several patrons turned to look at their table. The mention of human soldiers had that effect on people. Jake's team was sitting at the bar across the room. Pete Collins, his demolitions expert, had gone completely still. Lucy Hayes, their sniper, had actually turned pale. Danny Park, their tech specialist, was already reaching for his comm device, probably to call his family. Nina Scott, their medic, just stared at Jake with wide eyes. "Human military units," Jake repeated slowly. "You sure about this?" "Intelligence reports suggest the 3rd Terran Shock Division may be operating in the area." Kethver's voice was barely above a whisper. "But they're not our primary concern. We just need our people back." Jake knew better. Human soldiers were always the primary concern. Stories about them spread across the galaxy faster than hyperspace. Communications. Tales of impossible endurance, of soldiers who refused to surrender even when facing certain death. Humans who could survive in environments that would kill any other species within minutes. Pete Collins walked over to their table, his face grim. "Jake, we need to talk." "In a minute," Jake replied, not taking his eyes off Kethver. "Now," Pete said firmly, "all of us." Jake excused himself and followed Pete to a quiet corner of the cantina. The rest of his team gathered around him, their faces showing various degrees of concern and fear. "Tell me you're not considering this job," Lucy said immediately. "Please tell me you're not that crazy." "It's 1 million credits," Jake replied. "Split 5 ways, That's enough for all of us to retire. Not if we're dead, Danny said, his voice shaking. Jake, you know what humans are capable of. Remember the Vega incident? The siege of Proxima? The Battle of Wolf 359? Jake remembered. Everyone in the galaxy remembered. Human soldiers had earned their reputation through decades of conflicts where they had achieved impossible victories against overwhelming odds. They were the boogeymen that parents of other species used to frighten their children. The stories are probably exaggerated, Jake said, though he didn't sound convinced even to himself. Are they? Nina asked. My cousin was a medic with the Centauri Defense Force. He treated refugees from the Kepler campaign. He said human soldiers could keep fighting with injuries that would kill 3 of us. He saw them use their own blood as war paint. That's just propaganda, Jake said weakly. Is it? Pete challenged. Jake, I've been in this business for 20 years. I've fought pirates, rebels, and corporate armies. I've never backed down from a fight. But humans? They're different. They're not just soldiers. They're something else entirely. Lucy nodded agreement. I've heard they can track prey across continents using nothing but instinct. That they can survive in hard vacuum for short periods. That they actually get stronger when they're injured. Those are just stories, Jake said, but even he was starting to doubt it. Maybe, Danny said. But do you want to bet our lives on it? Jake, humans come from a planet that tried to kill them every single day for millions of years. They evolved to be survivors. We evolved to be comfortable. Jake looked at his team. These were hardened veterans who had fought across a dozen star systems. They had faced down criminal cartels, corporate security forces, and military units from half a dozen species. But the mere mention of human soldiers had them ready to walk away from the biggest payday of their careers. The client is offering 1 million credits, Jake said again. When was the last time any of us saw that kind of money? Never, Pete admitted. But I'd rather be poor and alive than rich and dead. Jake walked back to the table where Kethver was waiting. The alien looked up hopefully as Jake sat down. My team has some concerns about human military involvement, Jake said carefully. Understandable, Kethver replied. But consider this. If you succeed, you'll be the mercenary company that operated successfully in the same area as human soldiers. Your reputation will be legendary. You'll be able to name your price for any job in the galaxy. Jake thought about it. The alien had a point. Successfully completing a mission while human soldiers were in the area would indeed make them legends. Of course, it might also make them dead. We'll need hazard pay, Jake said finally. Double the usual rate for Deathworld operations. Agreed, Kethver said immediately. When can you leave? Jake looked back at his team. They were still huddled together, arguing in hushed tones. Danny was shaking his head vigorously. Lucy was checking her sidearm nervously. Pete was rubbing his temples like he had a headache. Give US an hour to prepare, Jake said. We'll meet you at Docking Bay 7. Kethver nodded and hurried away, clearly relieved to have the meeting over with. Jake walked back to his team, who looked at him with a mixture of resignation and fear. Well? Pete asked. We're taking the job, Jake said. Double hazard pay, plus the original fee. Jake, Lucy said quietly, what if the stories about humans are true? Jake looked at each of his team members in turn. These people had followed him through hell and back. They trusted him with their lives, and he was about to lead them into a situation that terrified them all. Then we'll find out just how good we really are, he said finally. None of them looked convinced, but they nodded anyway. They had been through too much together to abandon each other now, even if it meant facing the most feared soldiers in the galaxy. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace near Caracal 7. Jake stood on the bridge, watching the planet grow larger on the main screen. Even from orbit, he could see the scars of war covering the surface. Smoke plumes rose from several cities, and the space around the planet was littered with debris from destroyed ships. "Looks like a war zone down there," Alex Turner said from the pilot's seat. Alex had been flying ships for Jake's team for 3 years, and he had never seen anything this bad. "Any signs of human ships?" Jake asked. Danny looked up from his scanner station. "Hard to tell. There's too much debris. But I'm picking up energy signatures that don't match any known alien technology." Jake felt his stomach tighten. Human technology was notoriously difficult to detect. Their ships were designed to blend in with space debris and asteroid fields. If Danny was picking up energy signatures, it meant the humans either didn't care about being detected or they wanted to be found. "Take us down," Jake ordered. "Find a landing site near the research facility." "Sir," Alex said nervously, "we're being painted by targeting systems, multiple sources." The ship's warning alarms began to wail. Red lights flashed across the bridge as missile lock warnings appeared on every screen. Jake grabbed the nearest support rail as Alex threw the ship into evasive maneuvers. "How many?" Jake shouted over the noise. "At least 6 surface-to-air batteries." Danny called back. "They're firing everything they have." The ship bucked and rolled as Alex pushed it through increasingly desperate evasive patterns. Missiles exploded around them, filling the air with deadly shrapnel. One blast was so close it cracked the bridge's main window. "I can't shake them all," Alex said through gritted teeth. "We're going to have to put down hard." "Define hard," Jake said. "The kind of landing you walk away from if you're lucky." Jake hit the ship's communication system. "Everyone strap in. We're going down." The ship screamed through the atmosphere, trailing smoke and sparks. Alex fought to keep them level as more missiles exploded around them. The planet's surface rushed up to meet them, a maze of dense jungle and rocky outcroppings. "There," Alex pointed to a small clearing. "That's the best I can do." The ship hit the ground hard, bouncing twice before sliding to a stop against a cluster of massive trees. Steam hissed from ruptured coolant lines, and several console panels were sparking dangerously. Jake unbuckled himself and ran through the ship, checking on his team. Pete was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he was conscious. Lucy was already checking her rifle, making sure it hadn't been damaged in the crash. Danny was trying to get the ship's systems back online, and Nina was setting up a medical station in the cargo bay. "Ship's done," Alex announced. "We're not flying out of here." "Then we walk," Jake said. "Danny, how far to the research facility?" Danny checked his portable scanner. "About 12 kilometers northeast. But Jake, you need to see this." Jake looked at the scanner display. The jungle around them was alive with movement. Dozens of heat signatures moved through the trees, some as large as shuttlecraft. The local wildlife was not only aggressive, but also enormous. "What are those things?" Lucy asked, looking over Jake's shoulder. "Predators," Nina said quietly. "Look at the movement patterns. They're hunting." Jake studied the display more carefully. The creatures moved in coordinated groups, flanking and surrounding their prey with tactical precision. These weren't just animals. They were intelligent predators with pack-hunting instincts. "We need to move," Jake said. "Full combat gear. Watch each other's backs." The team gathered their equipment and weapons. Jake opened the ship's rear hatch and immediately regretted it. The air outside was thick and humid, with a metallic taste that made his throat burn. The gravity was noticeably heavier than standard, making every movement feel sluggish. "Atmosphere's toxic," Danny said, checking his readings. "Not immediately. Lethal, but it'll kill us in a few hours without filters." "Temperature's dropping too," Nina added. It's going to be freezing in a few hours. Jake looked around the jungle. The trees were massive, with trunks wider than their crashed ship. Strange plants covered the ground, many of them showing signs of carnivorous adaptations. Thorns, acid sacs, and movement-triggered spines were visible on nearly every plant. "This whole planet is trying to kill us," Pete muttered. "Now you know why humans are so tough," Lucy said. "They evolved on a world like this." The team moved out, following Danny's scanner toward the research facility. The jungle was eerily quiet, with only the sound of their own breathing and footsteps. Jake kept expecting to hear normal forest sounds, but there were none. No birds, no insects, no small animals. Just silence. After an hour of walking, Lucy suddenly held up her hand. The team froze, weapons ready. She pointed to her scope, then gestured toward a ridge about 200 meters away. "Movement," she whispered. "Local militia patrol. 12. Soldiers, standard equipment." Jake used his binoculars to study the patrol. They were clearly locals, wearing mismatched armor and carrying weapons from at least 3 different manufacturers. They moved clumsily through the jungle, making enough noise to alert every predator for kilometers. "They're not our problem," Jake said. "We avoid them and keep moving." But as he watched, something else caught his attention. Shadows were moving through the trees near the patrol. At first, Jake thought they were just tricks of the light, but then he realized what he was seeing. Human soldiers. They moved like ghosts through the jungle, their black armor seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Jake counted at least 6 of them, though he suspected there were more. They moved in perfect coordination, using hand signals and staying low to the ground. "Do you see them?" Lucy whispered. "The patrol?" "No, the others." Jake looked more carefully. The human soldiers were positioning themselves around the local patrol with mechanical precision. They moved from cover to cover without making a sound, using the jungle itself as camouflage. "They're going to hit the patrol," Jake realized. "Should we warn them?" Nina asked. Before Jake could answer, the attack began. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The human soldiers didn't use their weapons. Instead, they used the environment itself as a weapon. One soldier caused a tree branch to snap, dropping a massive limb on 2 patrol members. Another used a sharpened stick to take down a target from 30 meters away. A third soldier seemed to simply appear behind an enemy, striking with bare hands before disappearing back into the shadows. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, all 12 members of the local patrol were dead, and the human soldiers had vanished back into the jungle without a trace. Jake and his team lay in the undergrowth, hardly daring to breathe. They had just witnessed a demonstration of human military capability that defied everything they thought they knew about warfare. "How?" Pete whispered. "They used the environment," Lucy said, her voice filled with awe and terror. "They turned the jungle into a weapon." Danny was studying his scanner frantically. "I don't understand. They should show up on thermal imaging. They should leave traces. But it's like they were never there." Jake realized that the human soldiers hadn't left because they were done. They had left because they had detected Jake's team. They knew exactly where the mercenaries were hiding and had chosen not to engage. The message was clear. "We see you, but you're not worth our time. We need to move," Jake said. "Now." The team began moving again, but the atmosphere had changed. Completely. Every shadow could hide a human soldier. Every sound could be a trap. They were no longer just on a rescue mission. They were being hunted by the most feared predators in the galaxy. As they walked, Jake couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. The human soldiers hadn't just killed the patrol. They had done it with such casual efficiency that it seemed routine. There had been no emotion, no hesitation, no wasted motion. just clinical, perfect violence. "Jake," Danny said quietly, "I'm picking up more movement, human heat signatures. They're all around us." Jake stopped walking. On his scanner, he could see the truth. Human soldiers were positioned at every possible escape route. They weren't being hunted randomly. They were being herded toward a specific location. "They're not trying to kill us." Jake realized. "They're studying us." "What?" Lucy asked. "Think about it. They could have killed us with the patrol, but they didn't. They're watching us, learning how we move, how we think. They're treating us like a training exercise." The realization was more terrifying than any direct threat. The human soldiers weren't just superior fighters. They were so confident in their abilities that they were using Jake's team as entertainment. They were being studied like insects in a laboratory. "The research facility is just ahead," Danny said. "But Jake, the scanner's showing something else. There are more human soldiers there. A lot more." Jake looked at the smoking ruins of the research facility through his binoculars. The building had been completely destroyed, reduced to rubble and twisted metal. But around the ruins, he could see movement. Human soldiers were using the facility as a base of operations. "We're walking into a trap," Pete said. "No," Jake replied. "We're walking into a demonstration. They want us to see what they can do. They want us to spread the word about human military capability." As if to confirm his words, a figure appeared on a hill overlooking their position. It was an asterisk. Jake led his team through the ruins of the research facility, their boots crunching on broken glass and twisted metal. The building looked like it had been hit by orbital bombardment, but the damage patterns were wrong. This destruction was too precise, too surgical. "Someone knew exactly where to hit," Pete said, examining a collapsed wall. "This wasn't random destruction. They targeted specific areas." Danny was scanning the rubble with his equipment. "I'm picking up traces of thanet. Crystals, lots of them. Whatever they were researching here, it involves some serious mineral deposits." "Thanet?" Lucy asked. "I've heard of that. Isn't it supposed to enhance mental abilities?" "Among other things," Jake replied. "It's also incredibly valuable. And dangerous in the wrong hands." They worked their way deeper into the facility, following Danny's scanner toward the strongest readings. The underground levels had survived the attack better than the surface structures. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the air was thick with dust and smoke. "Here," Danny said, pointing to a sealed door. "The strongest readings are coming from behind this." Pete set charges on the door lock. The explosion echoed through the underground corridors, loud enough to wake the dead, or to alert every human soldier in the area that they were here. Behind the door was a laboratory, filled with sophisticated equipment. But more importantly, it contained answers. Computer terminals still functioned, and Danny quickly began accessing the research data. "This is incredible," Danny said, his eyes wide as he read the files. They weren't just studying thanet crystals. They were trying to weaponize them. "Look at this." Jake read over Danny's shoulder. The research notes described attempts to create weapons that could amplify mental abilities to devastating levels. In the wrong hands, such weapons could destroy entire star systems by turning populations against each other. That's why the humans are here, Jake realized. They're not part of the corporate coup. They're here to prevent these weapons from being used, or to steal them for themselves, Lucy said grimly. "No," Nina said, studying another terminal. "Look at this." The research team discovered something else. The rogue faction that took over the planet isn't just interested in the weapons. They're trying to create anti-human technology. Jake felt his blood run cold. What kind of anti-human technology? "Weapons designed specifically to kill human soldiers," Nina read from the screen. "They've been studying human physiology, human psychology, human military tactics. They think they've found ways to counter human advantages. The implications were staggering. If someone had actually developed effective weapons against human soldiers, it would change the balance of power in the galaxy. It would also guarantee a devastating human response. "We need to get this information to the authorities," Jake said. "And we need to find the research team." "About that," Danny said, pointing to another screen. "According to these logs, the research team was taken to a processing facility about 5 kilometers north of here. But Jake, there's something else. The rogue faction has been manufacturing these anti-human weapons. The first batch is ready for shipment." Before Jake could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and a computerized voice announced, "Intruder alert. Unauthorized personnel detected in restricted areas. We need to move," Jake said. "Now." The team gathered their equipment and headed for the exit, but it was too late. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the corridors. Heavy footsteps and shouted orders indicated that a large force was surrounding the facility. "This way," Pete said, leading them toward a maintenance tunnel he had spotted earlier. "We can use the service passages to avoid the main corridors." They crawled through narrow tunnels and ventilation shafts, the sound of their pursuers growing closer. The rogue faction's forces were conducting a systematic search of the facility, room by room, level by level. "They're being too thorough," Lucy whispered. "It's like they know exactly where we are." Jake realized she was right. The search pattern was too precise, too organized. Someone was directing the search with perfect knowledge of their location. "Danny, are you sure your scanner isn't transmitting our position?" "Positive," Danny replied. "All systems are in passive mode." That left only one explanation. The human soldiers who had been watching them were now actively hunting them. But instead of attacking directly, they were using the rogue faction's forces as a weapon. "The humans are hurting us," Jake said. "They're driving us toward something." "Toward what?" Nina asked. Jake didn't have an answer, but he was about to find out. The maintenance tunnel ended at a large chamber that had once been part of the facility's power generation system. Now it was filled with manufacturing equipment and assembly lines. "This is where they're making the weapons," Danny said, studying his scanner. "The energy readings are off the charts." The chamber was enormous, filled with automated production lines that were churning out weapons and equipment. But what caught Jake's attention was the group of people huddled in a corner of the chamber, the research team they had come to rescue. "There," Jake pointed. 5 people, civilian clothes. "That has to be them." But as they moved closer, Jake realized that the situation was more complicated than he had expected. The research team wasn't just being held prisoner. They were being forced to work on the weapons project. "Dr. Helen Brooks," Jake called out to the lead researcher. "We're here to extract you." The woman looked up, her face showing a mixture of relief and fear. "You have to get us out of here. What they're making, it's going to destabilize the entire galaxy." "What exactly are they making?" Jake asked. "Weapons that exploit human psychology," Dr. Brooks replied. "They've discovered that humans have specific mental vulnerabilities that can be triggered by certain frequencies and chemical compounds. These weapons don't just kill humans. They drive them insane first." Jake felt sick. The idea of weapons that could turn human soldiers into mindless killers was horrifying. It would force humanity to respond with overwhelming force, probably destroying entire worlds in the process. "We need to destroy this facility," Jake said. "Pete, how much explosive do we have?" "Enough to level the building," Pete replied. "But we'll need time to set the charges properly." Time they didn't have. The sound of approaching forces was getting closer, and Jake could hear the distinctive whine of energy weapons being charged. "Movement," Lucy called out from her position near the entrance. "Rogue faction forces," at least 20 soldiers. There, setting up a perimeter, Jake studied the situation. They were trapped in a large chamber with only one exit. The enemy knew exactly where they were and was moving to surround them. It was a textbook tactical disaster. We fight our way out, Jake decided. Lucy, find a good firing position. Pete, start setting charges. Danny, get the research team ready to move. Nina, cover our wounded. Jake, Dr. Brooks said urgently, there's something else you need to know. The Rogue faction has been studying human military tactics. They know how human soldiers fight, how they think. They've developed countermeasures. What kind of countermeasures? Psychological warfare. They use sounds and images that trigger human instincts. They make human soldiers afraid, confused, angry. They turn human strengths into weaknesses. Jake was about to respond when the attack began. But it wasn't what he expected. Instead of a direct assault, the Rogue faction forces began playing sounds through the facility's communication system. Low-frequency noises that seemed to vibrate through the walls and floor. What is that? Nina asked, covering her ears. Psychological. Warfare, Dr. Brooks said. They're trying to induce panic responses. Jake felt it too. The sounds were designed to trigger ancient human fears. Fear of predators, fear of darkness, fear of being hunted. But Jake and his team weren't human. The sounds were annoying, but they didn't have the devastating psychological impact they were designed to have. They're using anti-human weapons against us, Jake realized, but we're not human. The weapons don't work on us. It was a crucial advantage, but it also revealed something terrifying. If the Rogue faction was using anti-human weapons in this facility, it meant they expected to encounter human soldiers here, which meant the human soldiers Jake had seen earlier were about to walk into a trap. We need to warn them, Jake said. Warn who? Lucy asked. The human soldiers. They're being set up. The Rogue faction is using us as bait to draw them into a kill zone. The realization changed everything. They weren't just trapped in a facility with enemy forces. They were part of a larger trap designed to kill the most feared soldiers in the galaxy. And if that trap succeeded, it would mark the beginning of a new kind of warfare that would devastate the entire galactic community. Pete, how long until those charges are ready? 5 minutes, Pete replied, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked. We don't have 5 minutes, Lucy said. They're moving in. Jake looked around the chamber, calculating distances and angles. The Rogue faction forces were positioning themselves perfectly to catch human soldiers in a crossfire. But they weren't, accounting for the possibility that their targets might not be human. Change of plans, Jake announced. We're not fighting our way out. We're fighting our way in. What? Danny asked. The Rogue faction expects us to try to escape. They're not prepared for us to attack their positions. We asterisk. The attack came from 3 directions at once. Jake's team moved with practiced precision, their weapons cutting through the Rogue faction's forces like a hot knife through butter. The enemy soldiers had positioned themselves to fight humans, not experienced mercenaries who fought like humans, but thought like everyone else. Lucy's sniper rifle cracked repeatedly from her elevated position, each shot dropping an enemy soldier. Pete's explosives cleared entire sections of the chamber, and Danny's electronic warfare equipment scrambled the enemy's communications. Nina moved between positions, keeping everyone supplied with ammunition and medical support. But the real surprise came when Jake reached the first anti-human weapon system. It was a sophisticated device that projected sonic frequencies and chemical compounds designed to trigger human panic responses. Jake smashed it with his rifle butt, then moved. On to the next one. Jake, Lucy called out. Movement in the upper levels. Someone's coming down. Jake looked up to see a figure descending from the ceiling on a rappelling line. At first, he thought it was another rogue faction soldier, but then he saw the matte black armor and the fluid, precise movements. A human soldier. The figure landed, silently in the middle of the chamber, rolled to avoid enemy fire, and came up with a weapon that Jake didn't recognize. The human soldier moved with deadly efficiency, eliminating 3 enemy soldiers in as many seconds. Friendly fire! Friendly fire! Jake shouted, hoping the human would recognize them as allies. The human soldier paused, assessed the situation. In a split second, then nodded toward a side passage. The message was clear. This way. Now. Jake gathered his team and the research personnel, following the human soldier through corridors that Jake hadn't even known existed. The human moved through the facility like he had built it himself, taking shortcuts and using passages that didn't appear on any map. They reached a secure room deep in the facility's lower levels. The human soldier sealed the door behind them, then removed his helmet. Jake was surprised to see a young man, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and intense brown eyes. He was bleeding from a wound on his left arm that would have incapacitated anyone else. Captain Roy Martinez, 3rd Terran Shock Division, the human said, his voice calm despite the blood loss. You're the mercenary team that's been stumbling around the jungle for the past 6 hours. Stumbling around? Pete asked, offended. You left tracks that a blind child could follow, Roy replied matter-of-factly. Your thermal signatures were visible from orbit. Your communications were intercepted and decoded within minutes of arrival. If we hadn't been protecting you, you would have been dead before you reached the facility. Jake felt a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. Protecting us? Orders, Roy said simply. Command decided you might be useful. Turns out they were right. You destroyed the anti-human equipment before my people walked into the trap. Your people? Nina asked. My squad was supposed to infiltrate this facility 20 minutes ago. The rogue faction had prepared a kill zone specifically designed to eliminate human soldiers. Thanks to your interference, we were able to identify and avoid the trap. Jake studied the human soldier. Roy was treating his wound with casual efficiency, using medical supplies from his pack. The injury was serious, but he showed no signs of pain or distress. He might as well have been discussing the weather. How badly are you hurt? Nina asked, her medical training overriding her fear. Shrapnel from an improvised explosive device, Roy replied. 7 pieces too close to major blood vessels. Nothing life-threatening if treated properly. Nina looked at the wound more closely. You should be in shock. That much blood loss should have you unconscious. Human physiology, Roy said. We're adapted for trauma survival. It takes a lot more than this to stop us. Jake was beginning to understand why human soldiers were so feared. It wasn't just their training or their equipment. They were literally built different, evolved on a world that had tried to kill them. Every day for millions of years. Captain Martinez, Dr. Brooks said, we need to discuss what the rogue faction is planning. They've developed weapons specifically designed to kill human soldiers. Roy's expression didn't change, but Jake noticed his hand move closer to his sidearm. Explain. They've been studying human psychology and physiology. They've discovered that humans have specific vulnerabilities that can be exploited. The weapons don't just kill humans. They drive them insane first. Psychological warfare, Roy said. We've encountered similar tactics before. The human mind is adaptable. We develop countermeasures. Not for these weapons, Dr. Brooks insisted. They've found ways to trigger genetic-level responses. Fear, rage, panic. They can turn human soldiers into mindless killers. For the first time, Jake saw something like concern cross Roy's face. How advanced are these weapons? The first batch is ready for shipment, Dr. Brooks continued. They plan to sell them to the highest bidders across the galaxy. Pirates, rebels, anyone with enough credits and a grudge against humanity. Roy was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When he spoke again, his voice had a hard edge that made Jake's skin crawl. "That changes everything," Roy said. "If anti-human weapons reach the black market, Command will have no choice but to respond with overwhelming force." "What does that mean?" Danny asked. "It means they'll sterilize every world that purchases or uses these weapons," Roy replied without emotion. "Complete planetary bombardment. No survivors. No exceptions." The casual way Roy discussed genocide was more terrifying than any threat. He wasn't being cruel or vindictive. He was simply stating military policy as if he were reading from a manual. "There has to be another way," Nina said. "There is," Roy replied. "We destroy the weapons here, eliminate the research data, and make sure no one else can replicate the technology." "How do we do that?" Jake asked. Roy studied the room's layout, then pointed to a ventilation grate near the ceiling. "The facility's main computer core is 3 levels up. If we can reach it, we can delete all the research data and trigger the facility's self-destruct sequence." "Self-destruct?" Pete asked hopefully. "Every major research facility has one, Doctor," Brooks explained. "Safety protocol in case of containment breach. It's designed to completely sterilize the area." Jake looked at his team. They were all exhausted, low on ammunition, and facing impossible odds. But they had come too far to quit now. "What's the plan?" Jake asked. Roy pulled up a schematic on his wrist computer. "The computer core is heavily defended. At least 30 enemy soldiers, automated defense systems, and multiple checkpoints. Normal tactics won't work." "What would work?" Lucy asked. "Human tactics," Roy replied. "We go in fast, hard, and completely without mercy. We don't take prisoners, we don't show mercy, and we don't stop until the mission is complete." Jake had heard stories about human military tactics, but he had never seen them up close. The clinical way Roy discussed eliminating 30 people was disturbing. "Captain," Dr. Brooks said, "there's something else you should know. The rogue faction has been testing their weapons on captured human soldiers." Roy went completely still. "Explain." "They captured 3 members of your advance team yesterday. They've been using them as test subjects for the psychological weapons." "They—" Change in Roy was immediate and terrifying. His calm, professional demeanor disappeared, replaced by something primal and dangerous. His eyes went cold, and his hand moved to his weapon. "Where?" Roy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sub-level 4, Dr. Brooks replied. "But Captain, the weapons have already been tested. Your people are dead?" Roy asked. "Worse, the weapons have driven them insane. They're being held in containment cells, but they're no longer rational. The psychological damage is severe." Jake watched Roy process this information. The human soldier's face showed no emotion, but Jake could sense the rage building beneath the surface. When Roy spoke again, his voice was deadly calm. "Change of plans," Roy said. "We're going to sub-level 4 first." "Captain," Jake said carefully, "if your people are already compromised, rescuing them might not be possible." Roy looked at Jake with eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. "You don't understand. We never leave anyone behind. Ever. No matter what condition they're in. But if they're insane, then we put them out of their misery," Roy said simply. "But we don't leave them to be tortured." The commitment was absolute, uncompromising, and completely terrifying. Jake realized the human soldiers weren't just loyal to each other. They were bound by codes of honor that went beyond rational thought. "All right," Jake said. "Sub-level 4 first, then the computer core." Roy nodded and began checking his equipment. His movements were precise and methodical, but Jake could sense the violence barely contained beneath the surface. The human soldier was preparing for war. "Captain," Danny said, "my scanners show heavy resistance between here and sub-level 4. We'll be outnumbered 10-1. "Good," Roy replied. "That's almost fair odds." Jake realized that Roy wasn't joking. The human soldier genuinely believed that 10-1 odds were reasonable. It was a level of confidence that bordered on madness. "How? Do we get there without being detected?" Lucy asked. Roy pointed to another ventilation shaft. "We go up, then down. Use the facility's own structure against the defenders. They're expecting ground-level assault, not three-dimensional warfare. That asterisk." Sub-level 4 was a nightmare. Jake emerged from the ventilation shaft to find a corridor lined with containment cells, each one holding a different kind of horror. The rogue faction had been busy with their experiments, and not all of their test subjects had been human. Roy moved through the corridor like death itself, his weapon never wavering as he checked each cell. His face showed no emotion, but Jake could see the tension in his shoulders. When Roy finally stopped at a cell near the end of the corridor, Jake understood why. Inside the cell was a human soldier, but barely recognizable as one. The man was curled in a corner, rocking back and forth and muttering to himself. His eyes were wide with terror, and he flinched at every sound. The psychological weapons had broken him completely. "Stevens," Roy said quietly, "can you hear me?" The soldier in the cell looked up, and Jake saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Roy? Is that really you, or are they messing with my head again?" "It's me," Roy replied. "We're getting you out of here." Roy began working on the cell's electronic lock while Jake stood guard. The other two human soldiers were in similar conditions, their minds shattered by weapons designed to exploit their deepest fears and instincts. "How long have they been testing on them?" Nina asked, her medical training making her study the prisoners' conditions. 3 days, Dr. Brooks replied. "The weapons work by triggering genetic memories of fear and aggression. They turn human. Survival instincts against themselves." Jake watched Roy work, noting how the human soldier showed no reaction to his comrade's condition. There was no anger, no grief, just cold determination. When the cell door opened, Roy helped Stevens to his feet with gentle efficiency. "Can you fight?" Roy asked. Stevens nodded, though his hands shook as he took the weapon Roy offered him. "I can try." The reunion was brief. Roy freed the other two soldiers, checked their conditions, and armed them with captured weapons. Within 5 minutes, they were ready to move. The fact that soldiers with shattered minds could still function in combat said everything about human military training. "The computer core is this way," Roy said, leading them toward a heavily fortified stairwell. "Expect resistance." The resistance came immediately. Rogue faction soldiers had set up defensive positions at every landing, using automatic weapons and energy barriers to create overlapping fields of fire. It should have been impenetrable. Roy and his damaged soldiers attacked it like a force of nature. They didn't use conventional tactics. Instead, they used the environment itself as a weapon, turning the facility's own structure against the defenders. They moved through the combat zone like they were conducting a training exercise, eliminating enemies with casual efficiency. Jake and his team followed, trying to keep up with the human assault. It was like watching a master class in violence. The humans didn't just fight. They dominated the battlefield so completely that the enemy began to panic and break formation. "How are they doing that?" Pete asked, watching a human soldier eliminate. 3 enemies using nothing but a metal pipe and superior positioning. "Evolution," Dr. Brooks replied. "Humans evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill them. They learned to use everything as a weapon, to see every environment as a potential battlefield. The computer core was on the top level of the facility housed in a heavily armored chamber with multiple security systems. Roy studied the defenses for exactly 10 seconds before formulating a plan. Pete, your explosives can breach the outer wall. Lucy, cover fire from the stairwell. Danny, kill their communications. Nina, medical station here. Jake, with me. The assault was swift and brutal. Pete's explosives opened a hole in the wall, and Roy went through it like an arrow, with Jake struggling to keep up. The computer core was defended by automated systems and human operators, but Roy moved through the defenses like they weren't there. Jake watched in fascination and horror as Roy eliminated the computer operators with mechanical precision. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion, no mercy. The human soldier was a perfect killing machine. Danny, get to the main terminal, Roy ordered. Delete everything related to the anti-human weapons project. Danny worked frantically at the computer while Roy and Jake held the perimeter. The database contained terabytes of research data, psychological profiles, and weapon specifications. All of it had to be destroyed. Got it, Danny announced. All research data deleted. But Jake, there's something else here. Shipping records. They've already sent samples of the weapons to buyers across the galaxy. Roy's expression darkened. How many? 12 different buyers. Pirates, rebels, corporate armies. The weapons are already out there. Jake realized what this meant. Anti-human weapons were now in the hands of groups across the galaxy. Humanity would respond with overwhelming force, probably destroying entire worlds to prevent the weapons from being used. Can we track the shipments? Roy asked. Some of them, Danny replied, but not all. Some buyers used anonymous transfers. Roy was quiet for a moment, then activated his communication system. Command, this is Martinez. Package is compromised. Repeat, package is compromised. Anti-human weapons are in circulation. The response came immediately, transmitted in a code that Jake couldn't understand. Roy listened, then closed the channel. What did they say? Jake asked. Scorched Earth Protocol, Roy replied. Every world that purchased anti-human weapons will be sterilized within 72 hours. The casual way Roy discussed the destruction of entire worlds was chilling. Jake realized that this was how humans maintained their position in the galaxy, not through diplomacy or trade agreements, but through the absolute certainty that opposing them would result in complete destruction. That's genocide, Mina said. That's survival, Roy replied. If anti-human weapons become common, every species in the galaxy will try to develop them. The result will be a war that destroys everyone. Jake understood the logic, but the scale of the response was staggering. Billions of people would die because a few criminals had purchased illegal weapons. There has to be another way, Jake said. There is, Roy replied. We make sure this technology never spreads beyond the current samples. We destroy this facility, eliminate everyone who worked on the project, and make it clear that developing anti-human weapons will result in immediate planetary bombardment. Roy began setting charges throughout the computer core while his soldiers secured the perimeter. The explosives were more sophisticated than anything Pete carried, designed to create a chain reaction that would destroy the entire facility. How long do we have? Jake asked. 10 minutes, Roy replied. More than enough time to reach minimum safe distance. They began moving toward the exit, but the rogue faction wasn't finished with them. Enemy soldiers had regrouped and were mounting a final assault on the computer core. The firefight was intense, with energy weapons lighting up the corridors like a lightning storm. This time, Jake got to see human soldiers fighting without restraint. They moved through the combat zone like avatars of destruction, using every surface, every shadow, every piece of debris as a weapon. The enemy soldiers weren't just defeated. They were demoralized by the sheer impossibility of fighting such opponents. "Move, move, move!" Roy shouted as the facility's self-destruct sequence began. Emergency alarms wailed, and automated systems began sealing blast doors throughout the complex. They reached the exit with 30 seconds to spare. The explosion was visible from orbit, a pillar of fire that rose into the atmosphere and could be seen for hundreds of kilometers. The research facility, along with all its secrets, was gone. Jake's team gathered at their crashed ship, preparing to signal for extraction. The mission was over, but Jake knew that nothing would ever be the same. He had seen human soldiers in action, and the experience had changed him. "Captain Martinez," Jake said. "What happens now?" "Now you go home," Roy replied. "You tell people what you saw here. You spread the word about what happens to people who try to develop anti-human weapons. And you? My unit has new orders. We're hunting down the weapon samples that were shipped out. All of them." Jake didn't ask what would happen to the buyers. He already knew. Roy and soldiers like him would track down every single weapon, regardless of where it had been sold or who had purchased it. The human military machine would not rest until every trace of anti-human technology was eliminated. A week later, Jake was back on Nexus Station, sitting in the same cantina where this nightmare had begun. His team had disbanded. The psychological trauma of working alongside human soldiers had broken their cohesion as a unit. Pete had retired to a farming world on the outer rim. Lucy had joined a monastery, seeking peace after witnessing such violence. Danny had become a civilian contractor, refusing all military jobs. Nina had taken a position at a medical research facility, studying trauma recovery. Jake himself had become a consultant, advising other mercenary companies about the realities of human military capability. His first lesson was always the same. If you encounter human soldiers in your operational area, withdraw immediately. The mission isn't worth your life, and engaging humans will only escalate the situation beyond control. The news feeds were full of reports about terrorist incidents on various worlds. Entire criminal organizations had been eliminated overnight. Pirate bases had been sterilized from orbit. Corporate facilities